Yes, guys, what's happening? Welcome to another episode of the podcast. And for those of you watching on YouTube, you'll be able to see that, as always, I'm joined by co-host George. Mate, great to have you on board. And we are delighted to be joined this week by sports broadcaster and presenter Sam Matterface. Sam, thanks so much for taking the time to join us. Obviously, for those watching on YouTube, we're able to see you're joining us with a nice backdrop from the pub, which is always great. Welcome to the show. Thanks for coming on. We like to kick off the podcast by asking the guests about the team that they support and kind of how they got involved with following them. So, yeah, you wouldn't mind saying kind of the team you support and obviously how you got involved with following the club.
Well, it's very different now to what it was like when I was a kid. And I know it's going to be difficult for you to believe, but I'm in my 40s now. Yeah, no, don't leave the compliments. But ultimately, when I was a kid, I was obviously a massive football fan, fell in love with it in the late 80s, early 90s, and followed it closely, religiously, like, every other football fan. Once I became in the profession and was working on a regular basis, it's slightly different because you get to know everybody, you mix with people that are involved in the game. You don't work at one club, you work at several. I worked at Portsmouth for 7 years, got very close to that club. And then subsequently, I've worked all over the country, obviously followed England quite closely over the last couple of years. So, I've become very sort of close to people there. I work a lot with Manchester United and Manchester City now because of where I am. And I do a lot of Liverpool and Everton because I live in the north. But when I was a kid, I was a Chelsea fan. I was brought up as a Chelsea fan. My dad's from Battersea. My mum is from Battersea. My mum lived opposite Clapham Junction Station. My dad lived in Henning Road, which is a lot nicer now than it was when I first started going there in the early 80s. My first memories of it. So Southwest London was where my family were from. So they were all big Chelsea fans, and still to this day, my uncle, my cousins, my brother, my sister, mainly my sister, are all Chelsea fans. So, Chelsea was the club that I supported as a kid. And it's, it's still the club I would say, if anyone says, who do you support? I support Chelsea. But I'm not going to claim for any minute that I go to as many games as a supporter as I used to. I am very much, I'm a working football fan now. So I go to a lot of games. I probably do over 120 games a year. So I don't get much chance to be that supporter that went to Chelsea 3, Liverpool 3 in May 1987.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, you said you go to a lot of games. I mean, we've watched you commentate on a lot of England games. Can't not have you on and just ask briefly about how you feel that Gareth Southgate and England might do at the World Cup coming up later this year. Do you think the boys have got a good chance? Obviously, World Cup semi-finals, disappointing loss in the Euros final at Wembley. Do you think we've got the capabilities to go one step further this time?
I think they've got every chance of competing again. But the one thing that worries me a little bit, and it does concern me, is that they have got to a semi-final of a World Cup. They've got to a semi-final of the Nations League. They've got to the final of a European Championships. And I can't recall too many times when a team has done that well, that consistently, and continued the sequence. So I think it's going to be difficult, and I wouldn't be too surprised if they had a little bump in the road in Qatar in 2022. But at the same time, I wouldn't be too surprised if they went on and won it. It's one of those sliding doors moments. I think Gareth gets an unfair press. I think people will very quickly jump on his failings rather than promote what he has done. It's the world we live in now. Everybody wants to attack everybody. We know that from social media. That's the way it is. You're either for him or you're against him. And ultimately, I think, I look back to what it was like working with England, doing England regularly under Roy Hodgson. It wasn't much fun. I'm going to be honest with you. And it was much more fun. It has been much more fun following Gareth now. So, and the team now. So it's a different beast. It's a lot more open. There's a lot more integration. There's a lot more discussion. There's a lot more. It's a lot better football. Sometimes it's a little bit conservative, but I actually think that international football as a whole is quite conservative. It's quite a sort of cautious thing because it's all do or die. It's win or bust. Everything is a tournament. It's not like a league season where you can afford to maybe be a little bit more cavalier. It's tournament football all the time. That's the thing that matters. So it's a slightly different beast. But look, I hope they do well. I'll be there. I'm looking forward to all my games that I've been penciled in for so far are England games. So I'm excited about it.
Sam, I just wanted to take it back, if I may, right back, because I'm sure there's a lot of listeners who are desperate to find out about how you got into sports broadcasting and commentary specifically, because it's quite a niche area. I mean, for me, I did want to be a commentator when I grew up, but how do you get spotted or scouted, if you like, for something as niche as sports commentary? Because it's not a very job that everyone can grab onto. You've got to have something a bit about you. Yeah.
I lost you there for a second, George.
Did you hear the question? Go on, Charlie, you can take over.
Yeah. Sorry, I was just going to say, like, obviously, you're involved in sports commentating and stuff. It's obviously that's quite niche to sort of as a thing to get involved in. How do you go about getting involved in that? How do you get discovered to become like a sports commentator? Because I suppose it's a little bit different to broadcasting in general itself. How does that come about? And do you have like kind of tryouts for it? I mean, how does that sort of process take place?
How do you do it? Well, you have to be one of the saddest kids in the school. You're going back to sort of like, I mean, I started 1992. I was 14 and I went to work at a hospital radio station. But it really started probably before that, in the back of a car, listening to Jonathan Pearce on Capital Gold Sport, or Alan Green and Mike King and Brian Butler on Radio 2 as it was then Radio 5. And I remember very vividly wanting to be on the radio and to do that thing where the ball's going towards the goal and the crowd are surging behind you and being able to talk about it. I wanted to write about it. I wanted to talk about it. I wanted to be involved in it. I wasn't very good. That's the truth. I wasn't very good at all. I was one of the people that I ended up being a captain of a Sunday league team for a while. And that was because I was the one who would work the hardest, really, mainly. But natural talent slipped past me, unfortunately. So I had to do something else. And the best thing I've ever done was get involved in this, which is broadcasting about football. And I did it in 1992. I started at a hospital radio station and I just badgered, knocked on doors for 10 years until someone gave me a job doing it. My first paid job, I don't think was until 1999, 2000, something like that. I think I was 22 when I first got my first paycheck from doing it. I volunteered. I did loads of stuff for free. I learned about different aspects of broadcasting. So I presented programs. I learned how to drive desks, to edit things, to put things together. I did loads of varieties of different stuff. I just mucked in. I would do anything that anybody asked me to do in order to get through the door. I would file the records that we used to have, the CDs, whatever, make a library. I would just go down and sit in that hospital radio station for hours on my own and practice. So I had a load of experience by the time I went out into the freelance market. When everybody else was finishing university, I had loads of experience. So, that was really it. Really, and I was just knocking on doors, asking people to give me a job. Eventually, someone did, and then that was it. I just kept going from there.
Yeah, no, for sure. And like, obviously, you've commentated on some big games, England games, etc., like that. Do you mean how much preparation goes into commentating? Because obviously, you see, the commentators doing their stuff. I mean, you got like kind of lists of stats, and obviously, you got the team sheets and stuff. Obviously, it's not scripted because it's very much reactionary to what's happening. But how much kind of prompting do you get in your ear from producers or broadcasters or anything like that whilst you're commentating on a live game, or is it very much kind of down to you?
Well, look, the whole show on TV is a collaborative effort. It's a producer's show, and the show's put together by a team of people that do a hell of a lot of work. The commentary stuff really is down to the information that I've been given from stats guys and producers beforehand, and then how I deliver it at the time. So it's slightly different. And when the game starts, you just go. There's no narrative, no script. I spend a lot of time preparing. So, for example, I'm doing Soccer Aid on Sunday, and hold on, I've got the sheet in front of me. At the moment, I've got a list of about 45, nearly 50 players, and I am working through every single one with them. Obviously, I don't really know them very well, some of the celebrities, because I'm about as good at popular culture as I am with stats on baseball. But like I have to go in and research about them, find out about what they've been up to. I mean, I've spoken to loads of commentators in the past, right? Okay, so people have helped me get to a way of working and help me move forward in my career. Ian Dark was brilliant for me. Martin Tyler's been great for me. Jonathan Pierce, very supportive of me. John Motson was great. And they sort of tell you little bits and pieces here and there about how to put your notes together. But really, everyone does it their own way. And I try and work on it like this. When the game kicks off, that's the start of the exam, right? So it's like if you're doing a GCSE or an A-level, whatever, you know, that's about as far as I got. So I don't know what happens if you go to university. But if the time starts when the ball is kicked, and that's your examination. Everything you do beforehand is your revision. So I basically revise as much as possible between now and the game kicking off, and then when it comes there, I test myself and see if I can pass the test by passing on the information that I know. I try to find bits of information that you might not have picked up on, and by say you listen, the world we live in now, all the information is out there for some people, but I have to think about my audience. And when I'm on ITV, the audience is so big and so vast that I'm not necessarily talking to you, Charlie, who loves Chelsea and knows everything about Mason Mount, or you, George, who knows everything about Ben Chilwell. I'm talking to my wife's mum, who sits and watches the World Cup or the European Championships because it's on ITV and that's what she does. She's not got a particular great interest in football, but England are playing in a big tournament, so she's excited. So you have to be a little bit broader brush with your strokes and how you paint your pictures and what you talk about. So yeah, lots of study, you know, and you try and find things that are interesting to say. Sometimes they land and people go, wow, that was funny. And sometimes go, he's a bit of a knob, isn't he?
I had to. Can you hear me now, Sam? Is that all right?
Yes.
Yeah, sorry, I've got two parts to that question, really. I don't want to go into the exam on a literal sense, but who really assesses a commentator? Because I suppose, are you quite a critical thinker in how you look at your performance? And do you ever look back at your games and think, oh, that was a bad performance, or that was actually a really good bit of commentary? Because there's a classic line that one person,
George, I've lost you again there, but I'll tell you what, I'll answer your first part of your question, who assesses a commentator? And that is, well, I'll respond. Have you been on Twitter? Who assesses a commentator? Well, ultimately, you can't be led by social media, because social media is a very small proportion of your overall audience, and everybody. I mean, I watched it happen the other day to Martin. I watched it happen to. It happens to everybody. It just is. It's that thing. It's what people do, and you have to just let that go over and turn the page. Who assesses it? Well, I assess it, really, if I'm completely honest. I'm sure that my bosses assess it, and they will they will just stop hiring me if they don't think it's any good. But I assess it every single time. I watch every game back. I listen to every game back. Every game I do on the radio, I'll listen back to, and I will scrutinise myself, and I will thump the table and say, why didn't you do more of this? Where was that? Where was this? You should have been talking about this more. Why didn't you talk more about blah and blah? That's just what I'm like. I am quite self-critical, and I want to make it better. And I work hard. I really work hard to try and make it better, especially use of language. At the moment, I feel as if the biggest development in the way we broadcast is the early spotting of tactical changes, you know, tweaks and patterns and stuff like that. So I'm trying to really school myself better in those modes, picking things up, join the community to try and learn more about new coaching philosophies, etc. And then you do everything you can to try and get as much information as possible. And then my job is to distill all that information and then bring it out when it's relevant. I think sometimes we all do it. We've got so much information. We try to get it all out that during the course of the 90 minutes. Not sure that's always the right thing to do. Sometimes we have to try and hold it, but we're all guilty of it. I'm guilty of it. But commentary's changing a little bit. And I think it will change even more over the course of the next few years, in that I think it becomes more chatty. I think it's becoming more chatty. And I think people have sort of learned to sort of like that a little bit. I think sometimes, especially ITV, is a little bit more conservative in the fact that we do it still in a little bit of a, and I know not an older way, but like we don't go down the 3-man booth, for example. There's not 3 of us at the moment doing the commentaries, but I think over time that will all change. I think we probably will get more and more chatty as time goes on. I noticed with the Sky guys, listening to people that have been around for a very long time, it's certainly more chatty than it was. And I think maybe BT Sport brought that on, but it's all from America, really. Yeah, the American influence is huge in what we do. It takes a bit of time sometimes for it to reach these shores, but eventually, the American influence certainly comes across.
Yeah, you mentioned it's becoming a bit more chatty, a bit more conversational as such. How important then is it the kind of the chemistry within a commentary team? So is it important that you get on with a co-commentator or someone else you're commentating with? Is it important to have that chemistry, and if it's there, it comes across better in the broadcast, and if it's a little bit off, people sort of pick up on that?
Yeah, definitely. I kind of think that I don't really have too many of those situations where I don't get on with a co-commentator. I've always feel quite lucky to be doing the job. I feel really privileged that I'm doing some of these massive games and I'm out and about covering live football matches. Very excited about it. So for me, just being there is a major plus. Plus, I quite like people and I like chatting. So I tend to try and get on with whoever it is I'm working with, because it creates a better environment for everybody. And ultimately, we have more fun. I think that warmth is really important. I think you do get those moments where people don't get on, or they've had problems, or they've fallen out, or whatever. But yeah, I think it's important just to try and be yourself and try and let the warmth of the relationship come out without it sounding too cozy and like you're hanging out with your best friend and nobody else is really in on the joke. I mean, that's when it can become a little bit iffy. But listen, it's all about taste. Some people will like what you do, some people will not like what you do. I'm lucky enough to have been working in the industry for being paid to work in the industry for 22 years, being in the industry for 30 years now. So, it's been great.
You also mentioned some of the great commentators in the past. I mean, is there one particular bit of advice that really stands out that you still hold in President today that really sticks in your memory, Sam, that you always abide
Charlie, I felt
to?
very, very sorry for George. Every time he asked a question, he freezes.
No, it's fine. I can hear it. I'll take it. I was just saying that obviously you've mentioned, past commentators that you've kind of taken inspiration from or advice from. Is there any kind of advice from anyone over the years that's kind of stuck with you and that you still take into every game you commentate on today?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, Clive taught me something really important about probably 10 years ago, something like that, which was about the way I set things up, the narrative of the story. So, and he wrote me an email basically telling me he'd watched the commentary game that I'd done and just basically went through it and told me how it wasn't very good, really. But it was invaluable because by telling me it wasn't very good, he sort of explained why, what he felt about it and the key principles which he thought I should instill. And actually that has certainly stuck with me. But Martin has been very good. Martin sort of, very sensible about how to sort of stray the line. John Motson, equally very encouraging. And Ian Darke, when I was in Portsmouth, I was probably about 25, 26, and I was doing a lot of commentary for Portsmouth. They were doing quite well at the time. They were in the Premier League. And Ian Darke came on my show that I had there because he's a Portsmouth fan. And a bit like, maybe an early version of this sort of thing where, we have a group of people that are sitting around a table. He would come down, we would get him to talk about the show, talk about Portsmouth, and he would be great. But then I'd asked him to listen to one of my tapes, and I don't think he'd really heard that much of me before, even though he's a Portsmouth fan because he used to go to the game. But he he listened to one of my tapes, and he said to me, "Look, Sam, you should be doing national radio now. You know, you've got to kick on." And he said, "I can give you a pointer here, a pointer there." And actually, those avenues didn't really work out for me, but he was very encouraging, very, very encouraging to me. And as a result of that, it sort of helped me move forward, because it gave me a little bit more belief in myself, really. So he was really good to me. So yeah, and also, again, what I do and I always have done is I find the people who I think are the best, who for me I really enjoy listening to, and I think, God, how do I be like as good as them, as effective as them? What do they do that I don't do? What bits can I take from them that are better than what I do? Those sort of things, and then self-evaluate. Because ultimately, you're never the best. No one is ever the best. There's always good things that other people do that you can learn from. There's young people coming through now that probably do it better than me in a certain way, and there's probably a lot of other people that have been doing it for years that have done it better than me in the past and will do it better than me in the future. So ultimately, I want to learn from those people and try and get to that level on a consistent basis.
I mean, how important is it that you kind of develop your own style as a commentator? Because there's quite a few commentators about. Each one I'd say has kind of got their own style, from like your Martin Tyler, your Gary Neville's, to the lads at BT Sport like McManaman, etc., former players. Everyone's got their sort of own style. How important is it that you sort of stand out and you develop your own style? And how important is it you don't try and come across like someone else? Is it hard to find that balance of taking the good bits of people whilst kind of putting your own spin on it?
I don't think you can do that. I don't think you can.
Yeah.
I don't think it's possible to pretend to be somebody else.
Yeah.
Because if you do what we do on a regular basis, I mean, for me, I'm doing 120 games a year, going to lots of matches. I mean, I couldn't be somebody else. It'd be very difficult to hold that up, especially for 20 odd years or whatever it is. So you have to, and your style develops and changes. And I've got quite an excitable bent about me, so I get very excited in the big moments. I'm not the calmest of person, so I sort of get to a level. But I've also, as I've got older, I've probably got less excitable, and I'm a bit more in control of what I do. And I think that's a key thing as well. Understanding context of games. So I think it's always developing. You're always developing, and everyone has got their own unique style. There'll be certain things that I say which maybe people will think, oh, that's him again. And there'll be other things that people associate with others. But yeah, look, we're all trying to do the same job. We always come off, and we're all good mates, really.
Yeah.
In all honesty, most of us are good mates. So, for example, a lot is made of BBC versus ITV in the Euros, and Guy Mowbray and I would go up to each other before and after every game, have a massive hug, and say, "Baton handed over to you, fella." Whoever's next, who's taking the next live one, because we both did the games, whether they were live or highlights. We just, one of them was broadcast and one of them was kept for the archive. So we all get on quite well. And one of the things we always say, which is without a doubt, even Martin and I were doing England in the Nations League last time and in the qualifiers, and we would come off and I'd say, "Everything will go all right," and he'd go, "Well, got the goal score right." and ultimately, that's all anyone really cares about.
I mean, you mentioned, obviously, we know sport, like football, is very emotive. Like when you're commentating on kind of emotive moments or moments of real importance within games or within context of a season or winning trophies, etc., is it quite hard to keep your emotions in check as a commentator? Or sometimes, you can just let it out. There's iconic moments from Peter Drury, Gary Neville with, the Torres in Barcelona, and Paul Merson, of course, with the Aguero, etc., and Martin Tyler as well. I mean, is it hard to keep your emotions in check sometimes?
Well, if you ever get to hear what happened in those two moments that you just mentioned when I was behind the mic. So in 2012, when Aguero scored his goal, I was sitting next to Stan Collymore on TalkSport, and let's just say no emotions were checked. And I remember walking into the building the next day and Richard Keys coming over to me and saying to me, "What did you think of your goal commentary yesterday?" And I said, "I thought it was shit." And he said, "Correct, don't do it again." And he was right, by the way. He was absolutely right. I did the Torres thing actually very soon afterwards. I think it might have been before. I can't remember. With Torres, I was there, and it was again one of those big moments because it was Chelsea going through to a final, and but I think since that Aguero moment where I did lose control a little bit, I've never lost control again. I get quite emotional about the whole thing, and especially during the Euros this time, I had to mentally sort of rehearse what would happen in certain circumstances before I'd sit in the hotel room before the games and go through what I thought might happen. And this happens, what this goal for. Because actually, England scoring a winning goal against Germany, when I start thinking about it, I get a little bit emotional about it. So, especially when I think of some of the things I'd like to say when that happened, and I mean, all right, okay, calm that down, go through it, say it now, and then when you get there, you'll know what's about. So yeah, you do have to be a little bit careful, and you can't get. I don't. Would you want me to be detached from it? Would you want me not to care? Would you want me not to be a part of it? I don't know, but I mean, I feel like I'd want someone to be at least sounding like they're enjoying the moment.
I think as a consumer or as a viewer, you want a reaction in the moment to it. So if it's a big moment, you want someone to give their proper reaction, their instant reaction, rather than kind of holding themselves in. Obviously, you've got to be within reason. You've got to kind of not completely go mad, etc. But you want some sort of emotion to be shown. You don't want it to come across like static or robotic or anything like that. Because at the end of the day, people remember these big moments just as much as the moment itself. They remember the commentary from it as well. I mean, that Aguero line is a classic. People will never forget that. It wasn't just the moment; it was the commentary that goes with it. So I think it is important that commentators, give what they're feeling at the time, but obviously kind of slightly within reason as well. I mean, so just to round out, you've commentated on a lot of games. You've got the World Cup coming up as well. You got any standout moments that you've commentated on that you thought, oh, do you know what, that was special? I'm so glad that I got to kind of take that in.
I'll never have again the night I had at Euro 2021 or 2020, whatever it was called. I can't remember because it was in a different year.
Yeah.
But the England-Denmark game. The England-Denmark game was the most watched match on a single TV channel in British history. So we had over 28 million people watching on linear TV live. So I think probably with the online audience as well, we had about 30 million people watching. It's the biggest ever. And I don't know if that will ever happen again. I hope it does, because if it does happen again, it will mean that England have done very well again. But it won't happen probably for a long time. Or if it happens, it will happen in this summer's World Cup. I don't think I'll ever get to be. It was special this European Championships because most of the time there was nobody there. You've got to remember the first few games, it was limited capacity. Up until the Czech Republic game, we only had like a third of the crowd, and even for the later games, it was 67. It was only when we got to the semi-finals and the final that we had full capacity. So you're talking about, it's a different time. And I was watching some of it back actually, because we were just making a little a reel the other day. I was watching some of it back, and I said to the person making it, I said, it doesn't really sound like me doing that. It sounds a bit like it sounds a bit extra. And they said to me, you've got to remember at the time, it was different. It was a different time. Everyone had been locked down for a year, pretty much. There'd been restrictions placed on everybody for a long time. So everybody being in a football stadium, enjoying a nation coercing moment, was an expression of relief, emotion, and passion that we hadn't seen for a long time. Going back, I did the FA Cup final that year, and looking back from my notes, I think there was only 8,000 people at the FA Cup final that year. I think that's right, something like that. It was, it was the same. There was only about a month before. So yeah, I think that period, that reopening of Wembley and it coming with the Denmark game, I don't think I'll ever have anything like that again. Although I did say after the Scotland game, oh, this is the biggest game I'll ever commentate on. And my boss turned around and said to me after the Denmark game, do the final on Sunday. So I doubt it was the biggest game you'd ever commentate on.
That's a fair point. I mean, it sounds like a good point to round out, Sam. I'm very generous with your time. I do really appreciate it very much. Where can people find out more about you? Obviously, you're on ITV, TalkSport, etc. Social media, good place to get you as well.
Yeah, I mean, I'm on Insta at Sam Matterface. The one benefit of having the worst name in human history is that nobody else has got your Twitter handle, so it's just my name. So yeah, I'm there. I'm doing TalkSport for the summer. I'm doing the European Championships for the Lionesses, which is great. I get to do that every couple of years, which is good. And I've got Soccer Aid this weekend. So yeah, and then after between that time, I'm having a bit of a break and going off to the States for a little while, just for a bit of rest and recuperation before it all starts again. But yeah, looking forward to another big season. It's been a very interesting campaign. So yeah.
Yeah, no, definitely, guys. I've linked Sam's socials in the description below, so make sure you go out there and give him a follow. I'm obviously on TalkSport, ITV, so make sure you give him some support with his commentary and all that sort of stuff. And yeah, Sam, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it. Very generous of you to give up your time. Thank you so much, George. Thanks as always. I hope you can hear this, mate. Just speak. You can mark
I feel so sorry for George. Poor old George has been sitting there for ages and just been breaking up.
Maybe you can mark our conversation that we had. He can watch it back and give us some feedback.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, Sam, thank you so much. Really appreciate your time. Guys, make sure you subscribe to the YouTube channel and leave some good reviews on the podcast. But until then, we'll be back later on in the week. Take care and enjoy the rest of the week. Cheers, guys.